If you look at my channel, the first 20 or 30 videos are all about gun rights, and I've always had a particular interest in open carry. Concealed carry is great. Obviously, I think everyone should have the rights to concealed carry, and there has been a ton of progress in terms of advancing concealed and open carry rights. But there's something about open carry that I find particularly appealing. It is kind of an explicit politicization of gun ownership, and I think that's really important. There's lots of good reasons to own guns: for hunting, for pest control, for personal defense, for recreation. Right? These are all perfectly valid reasons, and the arguments against owning guns are so weak that they don't even if they were true, they wouldn't preclude people owning them for those reasons alone. But I think the number one reason, the most important reason, is the political implications of gun rights. Now, it's not perfect, and if people want to talk about that tonight, they are welcome to. There's certainly things you can say that are worth saying and worth debating on that, but that is what constitution or open carry is largely about. Now, it also serves a very necessary educational purpose for two reasons. One, just the laws. It's legal and people don't realize that it is. That's the number one thing that you hear when people are doing open carry protests, is people are just amazed that it's legal when in fact it is in most places. Some states do vary. This is one of the laws where there is some variance state to state, but it is legal most places, and it's usually legal without too much regulation. So there's that, and then there's also, I think, even the more important meta point of showing people that gun ownership is actually very common, and it is. Now, most gun owners don't open carry. Quite a few do concealed carry, but I don't know what the numbers are, and I don't think we actually can't get good numbers on that because too many states now have constitutional carry, which means there's no real good way to track how many people are doing it. But a lot of people seem to imagine that gun ownership is this very rare thing that very few people do, and they every day in most areas of the country, with a few possible exceptions in some of the biggest urban centers like New York, you are encountering people on a daily basis, probably multiple times a day. Like if you go to a Walmart just about anywhere in the country, you're going to pass people. If it's a state that allows concealed carry, you're probably going to pass people who are concealed carrying. But even if not that, you're going to be passing people who own guns 30–40% of the time, maybe more depending where you are, and maybe slightly less. But even 10%, it's going to be a lot of people. But you don't see their guns, and you don't know their gun owners, and so you can mentally and viscerally start to believe that it's just not that common. And open carry is something to show people that it is actually common, and also to normalize it, which is the main thing. There's a lot of people, and I do believe that the majority of gun control comes from a place of hoplophobia. People are afraid of guns. They've never seen them other than on a police officer. They associate them only with crime and with mass shootings. And coming to realize that how heavily armed the society actually is and how widely held guns are is actually one thing that might be a good palliative for this. Now, I won't cure everybody. There's plenty of people who are fully aware of how common they are and still hate them. But it's valuable for that. So for many years, I would have, if I'm bored, one of the things that I'll go on YouTube and watch is open carry protests. Some people call them Second Amendment audits, but basically guys who will, not always guys, usually guys, sometimes girls. I just watched one last night. It was these 4 girls in Oklahoma doing it, but will go and wear a gun, often a handgun, but sometimes rifles, sometimes multiple guns, and walk around. And you could argue that they're trying to get a rise or to solicit a reaction. And to be fair, that's definitely true some of the time. Sorry, I'm just updating the video details. Sometimes I think it's more mundane. They're just maybe doing a litter pickup or just handing out flyers. They're not trying to get a rise. Some people are, some people aren't. If they are trying to get a rise, I feel like that's fine. That's a very common type of political activism. I feel like the open carry people popularized it before other people did, right? So now you've got the Steven Crowders going, ask me anything, or tell me why I'm wrong. And gun rights people have been doing that with guns for a long time. They show up with their handguns and say, tell me why I'm wrong, debate me, we'll get it on camera, and we'll show that I know way more than you do, which they invariably do. So the other thing about this is the biggest protest recently was in Michigan, and obviously that's cutting close to home for me. I'm originally from Michigan. I lived in Lansing for 3 years. I actually bought my first guns in Lansing. I registered my first handguns in the city police office, for the Lansing Police, which is across the street from the state capitol. So where you've seen those pictures, I mean, I've been there with a concealed weapon. I walked to the police station with my college backpack with Beretta 92 FS in it, which I'll tell you, walking into a police station with a firearm is definitely an interesting experience. Uh, so. Uh, Also, it's cut across my family. So I have members of my family who very much support what's going on with the protesters, and members of my family who very much hate what's going on with the protesters. Being from a rural Republican area, but with a college where most of my high school friends subsequently went to college, and many of them became liberals. I don't want to say it's 50-50, but there's a very strong mix between liberals and conservatives in my Facebook feed. Plus, of course, a huge libertarian element that obviously, you add as you become more libertarian. So, but yeah, I'm reading both sides all the time. So here's what I kind of want to say about this. Finally caught it live. Welcome, Amora. And I'll get to the comments here in a minute. I'll try not to get behind. I don't know what happened the last time, but there are way more comments than normal, and I did not even get close to keeping up. So I'll try and keep up with this time. And Stephen Koza, we will talk about Canada. I watched a couple videos on that today, and there's a lot to be said there. So uh, I love open carry protests. It's absolute, and that's even acknowledging that I'm not sure that they're really that effective, but it's just very good to assert your rights, to show that you're vocal, that you support, that you're not afraid. And they're not perfect. It doesn't make tyranny impossible. It doesn't mean the government can't abuse you, but it does put the brakes on them in certain respects, in certain contexts. It definitely does. Look no farther than the Bundy Ranch to see that. Look no further than Michigan for that. So there's the side topic about COVID-19 and whether it's okay to protest that. I think the answer has to be yes. Okay, if we're going to go with you can't protest and you have to do what the government says, as long as the government says that there's an emergency, or as long as the government says it's here to protect people, and the degree to which governors and politicians are using the victims of this disease as human shields to advance their policies is despicable, but not entirely surprising. And you can see that, and Thomas Massey kind of points this out. There are programs that they could do that plausibly would only really be for fighting COVID, right? If they were to pass a law saying we're going to provide testing for everybody, or we're going to um, build more hospital beds, or we're going to deregulate the industries necessary for helping people, those would all be things they can do. But when they start passing other law, oh, we're going to do Medicare for all, we want to do paying for the college. So Governor Whitmer of Michigan, one of the things she suggested that she's going to do is pay for the high school education. Um, that has nothing to do with COVID. That's not about fighting COVID. That's using COVID as a pretext to get past a political agenda, and people are going to be mad about that, and rightfully so, and they should go and protest. And if you're going to say you can't protest because the government tells you that you can't, then you're giving them a blank check to do whatever. Your civil liberties mean nothing. Fourth Amendment, First Amendment, Fifth Amendment, 10th Amendment, Ninth Amendment, all the amendments, all the laws, habeas corpus, All that's gone. If you are going to say that as long as the government says there's an emergency or says they're protecting children or says that they have some plausible reason, and they don't need to actually have a good argument, they don't have to have evidence, they don't have to have proof, they can just make the claim, and approximately half the country will go to sleep and say, you did the thinking for me, and that's all that I need. And I'll say this to the liberals out there: what are you going to say if come November Trump says we can't have an election because of COVID-19, and I want to protect the old people, and I want to protect the children, and I want to help our healthcare workers who are being, not even swamped because it's not that bad, but some people are still going to be dying, so it's still not a falsehood. And so there can't be an election. And then when you get mad and you say you're going to go protest, he says, no, you can't protest. That will spread the virus. Are you going to not do anything? Or are you going to stand up? And are you going to follow the example of these open carry protesters in Michigan and everywhere else that they're doing? It's many other places. And by the way, I spent basically 5 hours last night watching open carry videos, most of them older, all of them from before COVID. And there are a ton from Michigan, a ton from Detroit, from Warren, from Coldwater, from Muskegon, from Leroy. There's basically tons of active open carry organizations in Michigan. And this is something that's been going on a long time. Certainly predates COVID, it predates Whitmer. It's just something about Michigan. I mean, I'm from there, so that tells you anything about what some of the people there can be like. It's just something that fits in. There's a lot of hunters, there's a lot of militia people, there's a lot of urban blight that people are very aware of and kind of can't make excuses for anymore in Detroit. So there's a lot of this open carry that happens in Detroit. One kind of funny other thing that's come up repeatedly is people make the comparison between the open carry protests now in Michigan or in other places, and then what happened to the Black Panthers in California. Now, what's interesting about this is, first of all, they make a lot of assumptions, like that everyone in the Michigan protest is white, which is almost certainly not true. Okay, you see a picture of 6 guys with masks. Are they all white? Open carry is widely practiced among African Americans. In fact, you don't even have to Google or do a search on open carry black man or open carry African American. If you just do open carry, many of the videos you'll see, higher than their percentage of the population, will be Black Americans doing it. And interestingly enough, they even split into multiple different groups. So there are left-wing African Americans, a la the Black Panthers, and there's some more contemporary open carry Black Power organizations that are out there right now doing marches, and then more right-wing versions, called the Colin Noirs, the Black Guns Matters types. Right. So the videos I saw of Detroit, the open carry people, yeah, they were mostly white, but they had a couple black people with them, and they were mostly talking to black people. And black people there in the video seemed pretty happy about it. They didn't seem to mind. Of course, the ones that had guns were for it. So the idea that white people do this and black people don't is wrong. It's also kind of funny where they'll, if they're showing their awareness of the Black Panthers. So what happened? The Black Panthers open carried, and then California basically banned open carry in California to a large extent. And people see, look, this was what happened. Well, are you saying that you're happy that that happened and that you want black people to be disarmed? There's a history of gun restrictions and gun control being directed against black people in the United States that's very ugly and very deep in the gun control movement. It's actually still going on, de jure, if not de facto. And there's history of that in Michigan, okay, in Lansing where this was happening. Okay, Malcolm X is from Lansing. If you read his autobiography, he talks about the police coming to his house and looking for handguns. They didn't care about rifles, interestingly enough, so he had a rifle that he would hunt with, like a 22. But because his dad was, quote, an uppity nigger, they didn't want him to have a handgun, and so they were showing up doing searches of the house. And there's a famous story, and you can read about it if you search it. In the 1920s, there was an African-American doctor who moved to Detroit. His name was Ossian Sweet, and the Klan attacked his house. He killed 2 of them with a gun in self-defense. He was tried for murder. He was acquitted on the grounds of self-defense, quite justifiably. But the state did not like uppity niggers having handguns and shooting white people, even in self-defense, and so they passed a pistol registration, a handgun registration. And before purchasing a handgun, you would have to, get a permit. And then when you would go buy a handgun, you present the permit, then you buy the handgun, and then you have 10 days to bring the handgun to your local police department for a safety inspection. And if you were white, you would pass the safety inspection. And if you were black, your gun wouldn't pass the inspection and they wouldn't give it to you. And they were still doing this. Of course, this was passed in the 20s and 30s. They're still doing the safety inspections when I was in college in the 2005 to 2010. So I had to take my gun into a police department to have a safety inspection. And I even asked when they gave it back, did I pass the safety inspection? And they just laughed. They said that is a complete pretext for us to register the gun. And they weren't denying blacks at that point, but that was the original reason. Now they've since liberalized laws in Michigan, and you don't have to bring them in any longer, which is nice, but they're still not to the point where you don't need a permit to buy a handgun, which is still a problem. Another example of this, when you buy any kind of gun at a dealership, they do a NICS background check with the FBI. They call the FBI, they give them your name, some of your information. They don't say what kind of gun you're buying or even how many. They just say you're making a gun purchase, and then they do a background check and they say if you're a felon or not. Now, if you actually are a felon, you know about this law and you will not do this. So you get a straw purchase or you buy it on the black market or whatever, and you can legally buy guns in most states without having to do this. Now, being a white boy with an unusual last name, I've never had a problem. And on many occasions, in fact, I think the very first gun that I ever bought, I walked into a very popular gun store on the outskirts of Detroit. That was the biggest, best gun store in Michigan. Guns Galore in Fenton, Michigan. If you've ever been there, it's a wonderful place. Very small facility, completely full of guns and very busy. Usually they had 5 or 6 salespeople getting stuff off the door. And I'm talking a gun every 10 minutes, maybe more, even before like Obama got elected. So I go in and there's a black gentleman who looks middle class, looks buttoned up. He's in there and he's already on the phone with the FBI. They've already made in the call and it's not ready yet. I go in, I look around for 20 minutes. I'd already ordered a gun. I go up to the teller. I say, hey, I've got an order here. I think I bought a Benelli M4 Marine Tactical 12-gauge shotgun, which is a fucking awesome gun, by the way. And he says, okay, we've got it. I wrote him a check for the rest of what I owed. They do the background check. They call the FBI, boop, boop, boop. It takes 1, 2, 3 minutes, and then you're good to go. I'm out the door. Black gentleman's still standing there. Now, my guess is he's got a last name that is the same as a last name of a felon. And so he's getting restricted right there. And that happens, who knows how much that happens per day. And that's a law that all these people favor. And all these people who are saying, well, look what happened to the Black Panthers. Are you saying that you agree with what happened to the Black Panthers? Are you saying that you want to restrict it for everybody? That you think it's a double standard, that they restricted open carry when the militant blacks became political with open carry, but not with whites. They've done it. They've restricted whites as well, and white people who open carry also go to prison and get charged and get arrested, and some of them face significant jail time. But it's interesting that they would come down on the side of like Jim Crow gun restrictions, which is what they're doing. And again, it's not racial. There's plenty of black open carry activists. You can go on YouTube right now and spend the rest of your night watching them. And again, even from like very left-wing black power movements, and also from American nationalist blacks who are just believe in America and believe in the Second Amendment. I even found a video that I'd never seen before. It was a black gay couple in Seattle. So they're black, gay, flaming gay, open carry, and the cops show up, and fortunately he ended up being okay. But that's out there, and all the people who pretend like this is just white people or that this is racist, they're completely wrong. And that's a narrative. They just omit all the black people who take part in this kind of stuff and pretend they don't exist, and pretend like this isn't relevant because there's been a crackdown on the Black Panthers in the past. There shouldn't have been a crackdown on the Black Panthers then. There shouldn't be a crackdown now. There's nothing wrong with letting your government know that you're armed and that you have an opinion and that you disagree with them. So, and they can't hide behind, well, I'm saying I'm doing this for the children, and so you can't complain. So there's a lot to go into this. I do wonder how effective it is. I don't really give a shit. They have a right to do it. It's very, very legal in most states. It's legal in Michigan. It's legal in North. They had one in New Hampshire. I didn't know about it. Otherwise, I might have gone. And by the way, I see it in New Hampshire. When I walk every day, I see open carry people, and there's probably more who are concealed carry. New Hampshire is a constitutional carry state, so you can go open or concealed. Either way, it switched to constitutional carry a couple years ago since I've lived here. And that's been the trend at the state level that we've been seeing in most states. So, hey, sexy. Hey, Joe. Gun rights in Canada are gone, Stephen. Okay, yeah, we can talk about Canada in a bit here. I watched a couple videos on it. Yeah, interestingly they are banning all guns, whether you hunt with them or not. Except they made an exception, except for indigenous people. Indigenous people can continue to own these guns, even though they have a much higher homicide rate. Also, interestingly, Trudeau says you don't need these guns because you can't use them to hunt. And also there's an exception for indigenous people to have them so they can hunt. Yeah. Would you ever consider being an actor? You have the presence of an actor, I feel. No. Finally caught a live one. Welcome. What are your views on Michael Huemer and his views on firearms rights? So I love Michael Huemer. I always recommend his books. I always like listening to him. Not familiar with his specific views on firearms rights, so I can't say that I have an opinion on those. Hey, Luke. Hey, Pentazoid. And Cap. Hey, I'm in California. I can't even get ammo anymore without registering for permission. Yeah, it's a slippery slope. It's a slippery slope, and most gun control is merely a pretext for future gun control. Um, and that's one of the reasons there's so much recalcitrance on the part of, and I wouldn't even say recalcitrance, adamancy on the part of gun rights activists. The rhetoric of gun control people is very strident and very blatant. They want as much ban as they can get, as much restriction as they get. The rhetoric is that guns are evil, that only the government should have guns, and that there's no legitimate use, right? And they've admitted strategically that they can't get everything that they want all at once. It's proven very difficult in the United States, even with massive shootings, high-profile shootings. They get very little or nothing most of the time. And so there's been this attempt at gradualism that's, I mean, explicit and obvious. And so why would any gun rights people concede even an inch when we know that they want to take a mile? What's it like owning a cow? Well, the cow is dead and it's in the freezer and it feels great. Tastes wonderful. And, food security is important. But when we owned the cow, we only owned it for like a week before it died. So, I never really got to know it very well. I'm looking out over my window at a huge lightning storm over the nation's capital. Let's hope lightning strikes all the right places. There's a black gun group in Texas called Naga. I think I might have seen there's a couple. There's actually a rich history of left-wing black power movements owning guns and having guns and using guns and open carrying guns. And to my knowledge, the more white organizations fully support that. The gun rights organizations really are colorblind. Even if they have some kind of implicit bias, they want black people to own guns. They encourage black people to own guns. They want to grow the movement. And I think a lot of black people are too realistic to be stupid liberals when it comes to this. They know better. Like, they know and if you watch the Detroit video, one of the guys, look, there was, my house got burgled. I called the cops and they never came. So what the fuck? What the fuck am I supposed to do? Don't be stupid. Don't put your life in their hands. They're not going to be able to take care of you, even if they wanted to. They don't have the wherewithal to do it. And if they tried to make themselves have the wherewithal, that would be a terrible police state that we wouldn't want to live in. There was a window period where you could buy ammo without a background check. Heck, you could even buy ammo online. Or you could just go to Nevada and buy some. Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. Mao. It's true. It's absolutely true. The problem with the Canadians, Stephen Koza, is that you don't have gun rights, you have gun privileges. And the video I saw was got lots of views, totally Canadian, and he stresses repeatedly how we're not America. This isn't like America. We don't want American style laws. We don't want American style gun ownership. They want it to be heavily regulated. Okay, well then it will never be popular. And your rhetoric is that it's super dangerous and that it's something that the general populace shouldn't have, and that owning a gun is something that should be restricted to some elite class of people who can afford all the licenses, and he was talking about certain types of guns. So in Canada, it does vary what you're talking about, just like it does in the United States, but obviously way more restricted. But you don't have gun rights in Canada. He did say gun rights, and I was like, what are you talking about? There's no Second Amendment in Canada. Everything is a privilege, and you're not making some kind of common law argument that we have a right as Englishmen or whatever, or as humans, or human rights to own a gun, which is what Americans would say. Like Americans, if you were to come and say, we're deleting the Second Amendment, it's just not there anymore, Americans would not give two shits. They would say, sorry, that's not how it works. Our rights predate government from God or from nature or whatever it is, and you can delete that and it doesn't mean a thing. You still have a right to own a gun. That's what a large number of Americans, not all, but a large number of Americans, more Americans than there are Canadians, would believe that. So you're conceding too much of the gun control argument. You're conceding enough that you've surrendered all of your defenses, and you're basically begging to not let them take more than they really would. I think if Biden were elected, I am sure he would implement a national ban on AR-15. He said he didn't think people should have those guns. I think that's a fair thing to believe. Their rhetoric certainly points that way. But I would have said the same thing about Barack Obama. And Barack Obama had legislative control for a couple years, and he had a pretty popular mandate, and yet he did not do that. It's a very hard fight in the United States. It's a very, very hard fight. It's like guaranteeing, in many people's minds, it guarantees that they'll lose elections. Now, that does not mean I will trust Biden. I won't. But I would have said the same about Obama. Millions of people assume that about Obama. That's why gun sales shot up so much, because of him. And yet what he ended up doing, even when he was a lame duck president and really couldn't pay any political cost, he did a couple executive orders that were they weren't good, but they're very marginal. So really, I was at a gun shop last week, and they told me I needed to register my firearm to current address again to get ammo. Yeah, the guy in Canada was saying that for AR-15s in Canada, which can only have 5 rounds, that the RCMP does a check on them every single day. And so if they do any kind of violation on any day, they'll lose the license. You can still get an SKS, but the AK-47 is banned because it's something liberals have heard of. Stephen, I heard that they banned any diameter over 20 millimeters, which would include a lot of 12 gauge shotguns. And apparently this is relatively new, but it sounds like this is going to include 20 gauge shotguns, or not 20 gauge, 12 gauge shotguns, 10 gauge shotguns. I guess some of the 12 gauges if they have a permanent choke, but most shotguns don't have permanent chokes. So it's going to ban a lot of those. It's going to ban, it's banning a lot of bolt action rifles, right? If they're over that diameter. So he also pointed out there was a shooting in Montreal at the Polytechnic University in like 1989, and there was some kind of rigor was used, and that was banned a couple days ago, but not 30 years ago. Also, the gun used in this crime, well, basically like killed nine of the people were killed with arson. So we're going to let's ban all the lighters and matches and all that. This is interesting in Australia too. Australia has a lot of arson mass homicides for some reason. It did before the gun ban. It continues to have them. They have also still had mass shootings since their ban, although not many. Of course, they didn't have many before anyway, but whatever. Facts don't really matter if they don't fit your narrative. So, but yeah, he pointed the gun that was used in this attack was obtained illegally. This guy obtained an RCMP vehicle. He modified it. He obtained an RCMP uniform. This guy went to a great length, and none of these laws, I mean, literally, they wouldn't change a thing. What they're doing would not block the way that he acted. It's just completely, he didn't get them legally. He didn't buy them at a gun store. He wasn't registered in any way. He just got them over the border. And by the way, not all the guns in Canada come from the United States. Did they really stop selling ammo at Walmart? That makes me sad. I heard they stopped selling pistol ammo. I heard they stopped selling pistol ammo. Well, it's good for, if it's true though, it's good for every other store that sells it. It's like the assault weapons ban. They're banning certain types of rifles, not all semi-auto rifles. Yes, but they're banning a lot, and they're leaving an exception for indigenous people who have the highest homicide rate and a growing homicide rate. Also, again, so funny that they say, well, you don't need these guns to hunt, but then the exception is for indigenous people so they can, what? Hunt. Yeah, when I go to Arizona, it's nice to conceal carry without a permit slip, and you literally have pallets of ammo at hardware stores. Yeah, I wonder how many of those are serving the California market. Probably a lot. Even if there was a common law right to ownership for self-defense, the 1982 Constitution Act effectively got rid of common law in the political sphere. Okay, well, there would be those who would say you can't get rid of common law. Like, that's just not a thing that you can do. Like, your rights are immutable and they can't be nullified by any kind of government action, would be the natural law kind of argument there. There's no right to self-defense. There's a court doctrine of proportionality, which means you can defend yourself only with proportional force. Person has to shoot at you before you can shoot back, and it's all up to the judge. Yeah, and I've heard cases. I remember there was a case in British Columbia, probably 15, 20 years ago at this point. It happened when I was in college, where a guy owned a jewelry store and he'd been robbed a couple times, and the law was he had to keep his handgun in a safe, which he did, but he kept the safe, right by him, and he got robbed and he killed the guy. And I believe they used discretion and did not charge him. And this has happened in the States as well. There's a famous case in Chicago, which had at the time a handgun ban, and an 84-year-old African-American Korean War veteran killed an intruder in his home. He had grandchildren in his home, and this guy broke in and he killed him. And so are they going to come and arrest this black dude and, take him through the penalties are actually very heavy for that in Chicago. And they didn't, because it looked real bad. And so I think that you will see that, but obviously you don't want this to be left to the discretion of the judge. And I think that taking the soft line on this, taking the we're not Americans and we don't believe in absolute gun rights and we want to have regulations. When you say you want to have regulations, you're basically making a tacit admission that these are really dangerous and there shouldn't be ready access to them. And the guy I was watching, what does he use guns for? He uses them for sport shooting. Well, so the argument's going to be sport shooting is not that important compared to public safety. I mean, I'm all for sport shooting and all that, but it doesn't sound like a very plausible. Like, it's not that important compared to a homicide rate. If the implication is that banning these will lower the homicide rate, which the evidence of that is like pretty weak / nil. But that's the argument. I want to have a sport. I like to do 3-gun. Yeah, at one point he says it's hard when we compete against Americans because we're used to 5-round magazines and that's harder to change when the Americans have 20, 30-round magazines. How many people in Canada are going to hear that? I'm like, yeah, that's a good point. We should definitely know. The regulations doesn't include the choke, so shotguns are still legal. See, that's not what I heard. I heard that if the choke is removable and the diameter becomes over 20 millimeters, then it's covered. Then it counts as banned. If the choke is fixed and it's under 20 millimeters, then it's okay. So a 12 gauge with a choke that gives you under 20 millimeters would still be, but who knows for sure, right? This is just, and this is getting litigated. And Stephen, there is actually like a petition you can sign, and apparently over 100,000 Canadians have already signed it. Trudeau, these weapons, AR-15s, were designed for one purpose and one purpose only, to kill the largest number of people in the shortest amount of time. Canadian subject. So the ban applies to regular peace officers. Trudeau, no, they are exempt. But he just said, if is that an exact quote, Jeff? I don't want to, like, is that an exact quote? Nobody knows. The RCMP can ban them without legislation anyway. And that's the other amazing thing about this, is it wasn't legislative. And is it not true? I was going to ask you this, Stephen, and anyone else from Canada. Isn't Trudeau in a minority government now? Like, he doesn't have a massive mandate, does he? He's the PM in a coalition government, is he not? I heard the Conservatives actually got more votes than the Liberals did. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. And the idea that they can just do this by fiat without any kind of legislative action, and New Zealand did the same thing. I mean, it was just shocking to me. Oh, this isn't a debate. In some ways, it's not as bad as if they had the legislature come and do it, because now we'll have this taint. And also, Canada is one of the few places where there's actually been a back and forth. So you had the long gun registry that got abolished. I don't know if they reintroduced that when Trudeau came in power, but that was undone for a while anyway. Um, Other people are pointing out, I saw Colin Noor say this, that all the guns that they're banning now are guns that legally would have been registered earlier, which is the whole point of a registration. Registrations don't help with police work. They don't help lower crime. They don't help solve crimes. They don't help prevent crimes. They don't stop domestic abuse. They're costly because you have to, pay to maintain them, but then they're very useful when it becomes time to do a confiscation. And everyone in the United States who cares about guns knows that, which is why they do not want registration. That's an exact quote. That's amazing, but not surprising either. So yeah, these weapons are designed for one purpose and one purpose only: to kill the largest number of people in the shortest amount of time. And I'm going to give them to the RCMP. He is in the minority, but he only needs to convince either the Conservatives or the Socialists to go along with their agenda. Trudeau controls the government in a unitary faction, but only if he retains the confidence of the House. No idea what any of that means. So the Conservatives and the Socialists would have to team up to collapse the government and trigger an election. Oh, okay. So, and I guess when you say the Socialists, do you mean the NDP? Is that who, when you say Socialist, does that mean the New Democratic Party, or is that something else? I had a professor in college whose father was deeply involved in the NDP in like Manitoba back in the day. I only know that from my days in college watching CBC all the time. But yeah, so this is very political, to kind of show we're out there. There's limits. Don't push us. Don't tread on us. And again, I don't know that it intimidates people that much, but it shows, hey, we're out there, and it can galvanize other people who are sitting there watching. Go, hey, you know what? If they can do it, I can do it. NDP, yeah. So the NDP are the socialists, and the Greens are the communists. Now, but I was I was told in the video that I saw that the Conservatives got more votes than Trudeau's party. How many Fabian socialists do you think are in Congress? That's a good question. Well, like, as in they're in the Fabian Socialist Society from Great Britain? None. Um, I There's not many, I don't think, who are actually like ideologically Marxist socialists. I don't think there's many who are really into that. Bernie Sanders is one. AOC would be one. There's probably others who will use such rhetoric, but in a hodgepodge way. So there's not many of that type of like ideological ones, but then of the type who take a lot of positions like that in what they consider just kind of conservative, pragmatic way. There's quite a few, including a lot of Republicans. In fact, most Republicans, um, who just their mainstream um, traditional view of the federal government is so expansive and um, so discretionary in its power. Right? There's so much that it can do under the right circumstances that they may as well be. But I also think a lot of it is just the incentives of the bureaucracy and the incentives of the electorate. You know, they establish these organizations, these bureaucracies, and then they want to grow, and they get more and more funding and have more employees and more sway. And they're usually not spread all over the country evenly. A lot of them live in D.C., so we really do have like a capital city syndrome where there's this bubble, you know, the Beltway mentality, where everybody who lives in the Beltway, by and large, is working for directly or indirectly the federal government. And the social class there, the hierarchy there is completely based on political power in the federal government. And so all their friends think a certain way. And this is even true with like libertarians and conservatives. Everyone who lives there, not everyone literally, but like a very large number of the people who live in that area are kind of in that world. Uh, they probably exempted natives because it takes away the NDP's reason to be mad. Yeah, but what's funny though is Trudeau said these guns are not for hunting, but then they make an exception. They say, but First Nation people can have them for hunting. Also, we're doing this to keep Canadians safe, but the homicide rate among First Nation people is the highest, and it's growing. So if this is good to protect white Canadians, why is it not good enough to protect Indigenous Canadians? And if these guns are no good for hunting for white Canadians, why are they good for hunting for Indigenous Americans? Or like they're saying that like it doesn't matter that they have a higher homicide rate, and it also doesn't matter that they're using ineffective weapons to hunt. The other thing too that I heard being alleged, this was news to me, was that a lot of the smuggling actually happens on reservations in places like Quebec. That these guns are coming from the United States into reservations on Quebec, and then that's where they're getting into the broader Canadian society. And apparently this is well known, but RCMP doesn't do anything about it. Conservatives won their seats in Western Canada by massive margins and drove up the popular vote. The Liberal vote was more efficient and distributed. So, Stephen, this is why Alberta should leave Canada and either become its own republic or join the United States. Shots fired. And they should elect Jordan Peterson as their prime minister. But yeah, it's interesting how they're no good for hunting except for First Nation people, and we're doing this to prevent homicide. But First Nation people have the most homicide, and we're exempting them. I don't know if the exemption is completely, or if it's just they're making some things that they're allowing them to keep and others not. So, secret communists. Oh, hello, secret communists. Haven't seen you in a while. Welcome back. Um, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, so they have access to the sea. Yeah, at Port Churchill on the Hudson Bay, wonderful access to the sea. Well, with global warming, that might become a better port. Who knows? Uh, you can get in, but you can't get out. Democracy is like the mafia. Yeah, but the mafia is way more efficient and more reasonable, right? They only take a certain percentage. I noticed while conversing with patients that many of them who would identify and follow the liberal tendency completely agree with positions when I present the libertarian position. What do you mean when you deal with patients? Are you like what kind of patients? What's your capacity with dealing with patients? And look, people are so partisan and tribal here that if you present an idea and they're not attaching it to a certain ideology, they might go on its merits, right? They might say, "Oh, that makes sense." But if you come and say, "Well, this is a libertarian perspective and liberals hate that," then they'll say no. Yeah, you're in SoCal, but like, are you like a doctor or a nurse or um, but yeah, that's very true. You'll see a lot of people will do this where they'll have quotes and there'll be quotes from say Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi, but they won't attribute who is who, and they'll go and say who said this, and they almost always get it wrong. They can't tell who's who. So they'll say a quote and they're like, "Oh, that's definitely Nancy Pelosi." I'm like, "No, that's actually Trump." Um, so people are just going off of red team good, blue team bad or whatever. Chinese medicine, okay. So you're giving people bat stew and spreading coronavirus. Thank you. Um, yeah, I feel like I get a lot farther if I don't say, listen, I'm a libertarian. I'm going to give you the libertarian pitch. Let me go over all the libertarian ideas. It kind of works a lot better if you don't say, if you're not trying to ask them to buy into a complete political ideology. Now, I want people to buy into a complete political ideology. I believe in my political ideology. But if you come like, hey, let's just talk about healthcare. Um, and I actually had somebody on the communal shower subreddit, which, by the way, link in the description. Check that out. And also check out, there's another episode of the podcast that's pretty long on direct democracy. I uploaded that just today. So if you look in the link, there'll be a link in the description to the podcast and just look at the most recent episode, episode 29, about direct democracy. I thought it was pretty good. But of course, I'm totally biased, but whatever. But um, if if you're just saying, hey, let's like somebody in the communal shower subreddit reached out to me and they said, I wasn't a libertarian. I didn't care about all these other topics. I didn't read any libertarian stuff, but they were really curious why healthcare was expensive. And they just wanted to find out why because they knew it was expensive and they knew that was a big issue that was driving a lot of political debate. And he said he went around and he found a really high production value, snazzy edited, high viewed, 2-3 million view video from somebody. I don't remember who. I don't even know if he told me. And he said, well, the conclusion of that video is because we don't have collective bargaining. That's why. And he just remembered thinking that didn't make a lot of sense to him. And then he found my video, and I made a couple videos at this point 7 or 8 years ago, titled "Why is Healthcare Expensive?" I think I made one. Why is healthcare expensive? Demand. Why is healthcare expensive? Supply. And he said, I watched those two videos and you listed like 20 things and every one of them made sense and their aggregate made sense. And I was like, okay, that made sense to me. And then he started listening to me and now he's very libertarian. And if it had just started as I'm a libertarian, here's my political philosophy, you need to buy into this, that really is not going to fly with most people because you're basically asking them to change their identity, and they're going to be very unwilling to do that. But if say, hey, well, here's some ideas, and I find that that's even when I talk to very very liberal guys, and I can tell when I date people, I know they're not going to be ANCAPs, and there's lots of clues that they're a Hillary supporter or Bernie bro or whatever it is. And I know, look, I don't want to pick every fight, but when we get to a topic, I can start talking about maybe corruption, or about property rights or regulations, how they hurt people, or regulations, how they make stuff expensive, or the war on drugs. Right? There's lots of areas, and they can start to say, okay, this person makes sense. They seem reasonable. That's a different perspective that maybe they haven't heard because, let's be honest, like the mainstream political parties are really weak on the rhetoric and on the arguments, right? They have positions, and even if those positions do have ostensive good arguments for them, they're very rarely made or they're not made very well. And so the intellectual content of that discussion is close to zero. And so if you are able to come and say, let's have an actual discussion about that, you can get a lot of points. And next thing you know, they're listening to you about a whole bunch of stuff. Um, uh, Why do you think so many LGBT people are not right-wingers like yourself? Well, I think one of the reasons is just the demographics, in the sense that so many of them live in places like New York City or Chicago or San Francisco, so many of the active ones, so many of the activist LGBT people. I don't know if it's this true for the entire population, but among those who are publishing magazines and doing blogs and doing YouTube, YouTube that's political. Obviously, most gay YouTube is not political. It's about eye candy and sex and all that. Um, so yeah, a lot of them. I mean, when I first came out, I made a post on Reddit, just kind of asking for dating advice, and the people from big cities, they love big government by in general. They love it, and they think that if you're against it in any way, that you're misanthropic. They hate it. So there's that. There's also just this kind of they take sides in the culture war, and they see the left as their allies, which means everyone else must be their enemy, even though on the culture war, libertarians are not that bad. In fact, the Libertarian Party, in their very first platform back in 1970, said they supported gay marriage, which was like 45 years or 40 years before the Democrats did. So you would think that should be worth something, and it's unfortunately it's not. They really don't give a shit. It's much more, they want a seat at the table. They're being given a coalition, right? The Democrats are coming and saying, we have a coalition of all the marginalized people. You can come, and if you're a member of our group, even if our interest, and there's a lot of people in there. Look, African Americans are not like renowned for their love of gay people, and yet they're in that group. Neither are Muslims, and yet they're included in that group. So it's just kind of an eclectic, heterogeneous mix. But yeah, I'm all for communal showers. Well, so am I. We agree on something. That's the nose under the camel's nose under the tent. There we go. But as long as it's voluntary, I believe in voluntary communism, not involuntary communism. Okay. There is just a silent consensus to handle natives with kid gloves and let them do whatever unless it interferes with big mining projects. Trudeau. Well, so actually, I've heard Stephen. So the owner of the company that I worked for 10 years was Canadian, and he hired a lot of Canadians, and a lot of them had done a lot of work in not just in oil, but in mineral extraction all throughout, like in the Northwest Territory, in Yukon, in Saskatoon. And they were telling us that one of them was telling me that on these locations they had mandates where they had to give so many jobs to Indigenous people, but these people were not, they didn't know anything, they had no job skills, and they couldn't be fired because they're basically PC like hires, and so they would never work, and they would like just poop and shit. They would just take shits like in the middle of a room or whatever. They'd never do any work. They were ostensibly assistants who did nothing. So what's a clue that a date might be a Hillary supporter? Well, usually somewhere on their social media that'll be something. I'm with her. They'll say something bad about Trump. They'll praise her. They'll have clothing. Like there's lots of little hints. Um, Libertarians are indeed right wingers. Well, this is debatable. I'd say that's not unfair, but it's also debatable. Um, no, secret communist Benjamin Tucker wasn't a right winger by definition. Yeah, and like if we're talking about culture wars, libertarians are very often, though certainly not always, very libertine. Um, it's just that libertarians have a different kind of political philosophy that doesn't quite fit. So and they're very tolerant in general, and so even the ones who aren't gay and who hate gays don't think homosexuality should be banned. They might think that they'll have a voluntary homeowner association that won't allow it, but there shouldn't be any kind of law. And they're for free speech, and libertarians have been way out there in the front for like sex work and drug legalization and a whole bunch of other issues. So it's and then yeah, the people like Proudhon and Benjamin Tucker and Roderick Long, like there's a lot of people who identify as left wing and have fairly decent left wing credentials, but nonetheless identify as market anarchists or anarcho capitalists. And there's debates there internally. I've debated left anarchists I go to the Alternative Expo at PorkFest. There's always left anarchists there, and sometimes I feel like we're arguing about semantics half the time, which can be kind of boring. But I joined late, so I guess you've covered the GA topic already. The GA topic. Libertarianism is inherently political. How can you achieve your goals of small government and more freedom without some sort of political action or political change? Secret communist, have you learned nothing? I'm an anarchist. I don't believe in small government. Yes, I don't mind libertarians. Just think, well, so I'll go with ANCAP. I would accept that many libertarians are conservatives if that identifier means anything else. It is interesting to see where our sympathies lie. I find myself more often agreeing with conservatives and disagreeing with leftists. On the other hand, there are some issues where that's definitely the opposite. But I also find that when I do agree with these other groups, that they're very unprincipled. So I believe in gun rights very, very strongly, and nominally that should make me in line with conservatives. But conservatives do not believe in gun rights in anywhere near the same vehemence as I do, at least by and large. Now, Gun Owners of America, Larry Pratt, Justin Amash, Ron Paul, Thomas Massey, like, yes, there are this hardcore fringe, Ted Nugent, those types of people, they do. But your average run of the mill, not just person in government, but your average run of the mill Republican doesn't think that you should be able to buy a machine gun over the counter with no ID when you're 8 years old, which is what I think. Okay, so or that you should be able to buy crew-fired weapons or artillery or tanks or fighter jets, which I also think you should be able to do. Um, Likewise, I'm anti-war, and so some leftists are anti-war, although that really hasn't been a thing since the Bush administration in any kind of meaningful sense. But I'm really anti-war. Like, I think that Obama and Trump and Bush were war criminals who should be put to death. I mean, they deserve the death penalty. That will never happen, but that's what they deserve. That the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, on top of being stupid, were war crimes. That what's happening in Yemen is a war crime. That the drone strikes in Pakistan are a war crime. Serbia, Libya, Sudan, Somalia, Kosovo. I'm against all that stuff. All that stuff is war crimes. None of that stuff did any good. There's some left-wing people who are good on this. Someone like Glenn Greenwald, for instance, or Max Blumenthal, or a few others. But it's very rare. They're 1 in 1,000 leftists. So it's very interesting where I feel like as a libertarian, I have allies on both sides on different issues, but they're very poor allies. They're very intellectually inconsistent. Conservatives are for small government until they're in power, or until it's about war, or until it's about the police, or until it's about some kind of boondoggle that they, like where it's big agriculture or whatever other thing is good for their district, big coal, whatever it is. Left-wing people, sometimes they talk about civil liberties in a way that sounds nice, but when there's a Democrat in office, they don't give two shits about it. Sometimes they talk a good anti-war game, but push comes to shove, 75% of them are going to be just as bad a war hawk as any Republican, and the other 25% are going to be tepid at best. I mean, someone like Bernie Sanders, yes, it's true he didn't vote for the Iraq War, but he also voted to fund it, and he talks about how the same thing with somebody like Tulsi Gabbard, right? She's better than the rest of them, but like, does she compare to Ron Paul? No, not at all, not even close. Her rhetoric, how she describes what a just war would be is a hole big enough that Barack Obama and George Bush could drive 10 wars through it. So it is kind of frustrating because I don't know if there are any issues where left or right are strongly aligned with the libertarian position, even when there is some overlap. Is PorkFest even this year? So I don't know if it is or not. I'm going to start looking into it and getting tickets, though, just in case. I know ForkFest is. I want to go to ForkFest. So Derek J. Friedman, who has been a friend of mine for many years, he was pretty involved in that. And when I talked to him at PorkFest, he had been involved in ForkFest, and he really liked it. So I would encourage people to try both. What is your favorite gun aesthetically? The ones I own, probably my Benelli M4. My Benelli M4 Marine Tactical Shotgun has beautiful lines, nice a nice combination of curves and lines, and it's very ergodynamic and fucking feels good when you shoot it. Um, so that's probably it. Oh, in Georgia was a man was killed while attempting to make a citizen's arrest. I put more detailed question above. Okay, yeah. So I just heard about that today. I listened to Ben Shapiro talk about it, and his take was that that's definitely either manslaughter or first degree murder. It sounds like a trigger happy ex-cop, but we don't know all the details yet, and there could be details that change that. So that's a provisional assessment, and I won't, I don't feel like I can really say more than that without just completely speculating. If I went to PorkFest, would I be harassed, made fun of by libertarians? No, there's a lot of left-wing people who go. You might get in debates with people, but the thing is, it's not ideological. There's no ideological monolith at PorkFest. There's a lot of anarchists. There's a lot of minarchists. There's a lot of left-wing people. There's a lot of family people. There's a lot. And so there's a lot of open discussion. There's open gun carry. There's open drug use. There's orgies. There's families. There's gay dudes. It's everything. And there's a lot of really good conversations that happen around the fires, around the pavilion, around the various events. So no, you're not going to get mobbed. You're not going to get harassed. As long as you're respectful, you're going to be fine. People disagree all the time. People debate all the time. So no, you're not going to get harassed. I had to look up what PorkFest is, by the way. Well, check out my videos, PorkFest Survival Guide. Just Google, just YouTube search Lengthyounarther and PorkFest, and I've made a couple videos over the years about it. I hope some governors get recalled, but through the Second Amendment route. Okay, we can only hope, Erickson. Citizens' arrest of a tyrant. My opinion on gun rights is still being hashed out. I believe that we may need to use the use of firearms for revolution, as there may be no other way. But I think once our society is established, blank, well, you can use guns in revolution. Obviously, we're Americans. That's possible. I mean, it's just part of the history. So I believe in having militias that are permitted by local government, and it is our constitutional duty to take part in them. But with modern military weapons, one needs modern military training. Well, that was kind of the idea with the militia. A well-regulated militia meant well-trained. It didn't mean that the government had regulations on it. It meant that they practiced and that they were well-trained. And I agree. I do think that you don't necessarily have to have all the bells and whistles. If you have a couple guys who train regularly together and they're competent, they can be pretty effective. And if you have that multiplied a couple thousand times or a million times, that's very effective on net. But that is an argument for making more legal. There's this interesting thing where liberals go, well, the stuff that you legally have available now would not allow you to fight the government. Well, okay, well, 60,000 dead Russians disagree with you, but then that is just as easily an argument to say that we should liberalize access to other weapons then. That isn't an argument to say, well, we should destroy access completely. Whenever I went to Libertopia, there were leftist libertarians who were treated with respect. I had lunch with one, very intelligent. Yeah, look, PorkFest is great, man. No one's gonna, you'll be fine. You're criminally undersubbed. Well, Fizzy P, I thank you for that. And if you feel that way, try and spread it around, man. If anyone likes my stuff and they think more people should see it, find some place and post about it. I've been very bad at that because I feel uncomfortable promoting my own stuff. So if you think that it's good, then spread it. Find some place where you think someone would care and spread it. That'll help. By the way, it would be hard for me to spread it because everyone where I would spread it already knows who I am. So if that's how you feel, share the stuff. That's where I get subscribers, is from people sharing it. People share it on Reddit. People share it in their Facebook groups, and I get little bumps that way. I remember I was at PorkFest one year, and I got like 30 new subscribers in one day, which I think was a record at the time, and they were all from Sweden. And it was, it didn't take too long to figure out what happened, but there was an anarcho-capitalist Swedish Facebook group, and somebody started posting my videos there. In fact, he might even be watching tonight, who knows. So that's how it spreads. And I don't, like I said, I have problems doing that myself. I feel uncomfortable promoting my own stuff in that way. And I don't, if you notice, I don't typically ask people to do that. I don't say in every video. I probably should, but I just don't. So if that's how you feel, spread it, man. And I appreciate the compliment. But I think once our society is established, only then should gun control be enacted. Yeah, but then how will you have a new revolution to fix it? You're assuming that once your society is established that it won't go wrong. And I heard this argument once. It was from a liberal. It was an anti-gun rights person, and he said right-wing people are never going to accept gun control because the predicate for them accepting that would be that the government can never become tyrannical, right? If you could say the government will never be tyrannical and not just say it but prove it, then yeah, we don't really need the guns. But that's impossible. So you're never going to convince people to not have that safeguard. It's like saying you don't need a parachute. Well, as long as the plane can crash, yeah, you need a parachute. You should have the option of one anyway. So, because secret communists, are you alleging that once, quote, um, our society is established, that it will be perfect? Claims to be an anarchist, listens to Ben Shapiro. Well, secret communists, I listen to a lot of people that don't agree with me. That's one of the reasons I can have an honest debate with people. If I only listened to people who agreed with me, I wouldn't know what I know. So, it's not like only libertarians have good things to say. Other people have good things to say. I listen to left-wing people. I listen to Jimmy Dore every day, right? I've read books. I've read so many books by leftists. Almost every book on Israel I've ever read was by a leftist. Norman Finkelstein or Max Blumenthal or Glenn Greenwald. Look, these are all people that I listen to, and that I don't think that they're all wrong about everything. And I don't only listen to libertarians. First of all, there isn't that much libertarian content. And so, no, and I don't agree with Ben Shapiro on a lot of things. He's dead wrong about circumcision. He's dead wrong about Zionism in Israel most of the time. But he's right about a lot of stuff. And I also think he's a straight shooter in the sense that I think he's intellectually honest by and large when he's not talking about Nick Fuentes anyway. How upset would you be if How upset would you be if a mob of citizens beheaded authoritarian government French Revolution style? I would not be upset. I would be worried about what's going to happen after, but I wouldn't be that upset. Um, the point of a militia is to not be granted permission by tyrants. Yeah, you don't want to. You shouldn't ask their permission. You don't need their permission. That's the whole point. Um, you should hand out YouTube business cards at PorkFest. Everybody at PorkFest is pimping that shit, and I've been. If I go to PorkFest again, there's a good chance that I'll speak on like foreskin or something like that. I kind of got known to be the foreskin guy at PorkFest last year. I did speak on it briefly, kind of spur of the moment. The guy approached me who knew who I was and just said, "Hey, somebody backed out. Will you come and do a lecture?" But I mostly go to PorkFest to have fun. I've never gone to be a talker or anything like that. I was reading H.W. Brandis' biography of Andrew Jackson. He seemed to stress that state militias were an important institution and vector to achieve political power. I guess that went all the way. I guess that all went away. Yeah, well, the federal military, the central army, kind of grew and displaced the militias in a way that would have horrified most of the founding fathers, except for maybe Washington. A really good book on that, by the way, is Autumn of the Black Snake, which kind of covers the formation of the U.S. Army. Um, there's always been a debate between the Army's bad, we shouldn't have a standing Army, which, by the way, we have vestiges of that now. The Army has to get reauthorized every 2 years. Um, and those who think that a militia is good enough. And my reading, militias are not as good as offensive war. So if we had had a militia system, World War I, we wouldn't have been involved in. World War II, we wouldn't have been involved in. But we also wouldn't have been attacked, probably. We wouldn't have been invaded successfully either. So, and actually, the federal government and its army actually restrained a lot of expansion. If it had just been militias and filibusterers, there's a chance that Americans could have taken over Canada, Mexico, and a lot of Central America, as indeed they tried. But in many ways hampered from doing so by the federal government, which resisted them doing that, for good or ill. Uh, this immigrant girl I've been seeing just broke the news to me that she's illegal. How do you feel about that? No person's illegal, Arthur. In the 1990s, liberals used to scaremonger with videos of militias and their AR-15s saying they were a threat to the U.S. Now they say AR-15s are not useful against the government. Yeah, it's again, they'll on the one hand they'll say these are weapons of war and they're too powerful and we can't let civilians have them, and then they'll say you don't need them anyway because they're ineffective and they would never work. So it's similar to Trudeau saying you can't hunt with them, but the indigenous people need them to hunt. So they have this very schizophrenic view of guns, where on the one hand they're uncontrollably dangerous killing machines, on the other hand they're completely harmless and they could never threaten the government in any way. But then when they do an open carry march, they're like, oh, they're threatening the government. This is terrifying. So they'll say whatever bullshit pops into their head, and they're just not consistent about it. You couldn't beat the government with the current firearms available. They have planes, tanks, etc. Somehow the Taliban, without F-16, F-15s, and tanks, does a pretty good job against the U.S. military. Yes, they have on multiple occasions against the Russian military. So yeah, Boston Tea Party has a saying, 60,000 dead Russians can't be wrong, right? So they were, I mean, people talk about Stinger missiles and shit, but most of the Russian casualties happened from IEDs and from bolt-action rifles that were World War I and World War II era. So I'm not relishing the idea of an insurrection. Don't get me wrong. I don't think, oh, that would be awesome, be Rambo style and fucking, it would be cool, but it would be really bad, potentially. But it would be really bad all ways around. And there's lots of guerrilla asymmetrical elements to this that people are kind of just taking for granted. Like, well, they have nukes. Okay, so they're going to start nuking themselves. Like, oh, there's militia in Michigan, so they're going to nuke Detroit to get them. Like, no, they're not going to do that. And the military, I'm sure most of them would be loyal to the state, but they're going to have problems. They have problems when they invade Iraq and Afghanistan and Vietnam. What do you think they're going to feel like if they start doing that in America? It only bothers me that she could get deported. She's a Serbian immigrant. She has overstayed her visa and is illegal. I can't give you legal advice there, Arthur. I'm sorry. There's probably a way though. Where there's a will, there's a way. Uh, boop, boop, boop. Oh, see, open borders. It's just funny what ends up getting talked about. One day is nuclear power, now it's open borders. Boop, boop. Militia's rights were to never cross the national border during the War of 1812. They refused to cross in Canada. And yeah, that's very true. And people will say, well, isn't that a problem with militias? And like, no, that's one of their great virtues, right? That they're not offensive, they're defensive. The central army, the state-funded army, they're good for offense. If you want to attack, having that is a good thing. If you just want to defend, it's unnecessary. And militias are very eager for defense, but they're not very eager for offense. Which again, people will point that out as a kink or as a problem, but I see that as an advantage. Uh, New rule here in Mass: all the ammunition you buy here in Mass is recorded. The government knows about all the ammo that you buy. Arthur, why are you buying Why are you buying ammo in Mass? Buy it in New Hampshire. It's cheaper, and you won't get tracked. So come up to New Hampshire and buy it. There's no sales tax. What are you waiting for? Do you remember Glenn Beck's argument discrediting Ron Paul that he wants America to be like Switzerland, as if that were a bad thing? Yeah, I don't remember that, but that is hilarious. Oh my God, we'll be neutral and never get invaded and be peaceful and rich. Fuck that guy. it's ironic coming from him too, because he always talks about how much he hates progressives, and he seems to have, a little bit a better view on like foreign policy. That maybe we shouldn't be the policeman of the world and nation building and all that. And then he says, but we should make sure that we have a system that ensures that we continue to do that. Uh, do you like cartoons? There's some cartoons that I like. I don't like them all. South Park is one of my favorite shows ever. Dragon Ball Z is one of my favorite shows ever. Um, After that, that falls off quite a bit. When I was a kid, Thundercats was one of my favorite shows. But yeah, yeah, the effective firearms in a revolt against the government would be even more effective. Aircraft factories, aviation manufacturers, fuel, etc., all are in the U.S. Yeah, and the politicians are in the U.S. So, like the Taliban, they can't attack Washington. They can't do anything against legislators. They can't do anything against the Pentagon. They can't do anything about the highways and the bridges and the factories and the right. And Americans could do that, right? If there are targets that are too hard to attack, they could attack softer targets. So it would be very ugly. It's not something that I would ever want to happen, but it would not be necessary. And so much of this depends on if the revolution is 100 guys versus the federal government, and everybody hates them and loves the federal government, it's not going to work. But if the revolution is 80 million people that take over entire, like, let's say the interior Mountain West and part of Appalachia, what are they going to do? Like, it's not clear that they would be able to do anything about that. Uh, do you, Guy, do I gave you the right to stop the new government with my fellow anarchists? Do you ever have anxiety? You have a very calming presence, so I'm wondering if you are always this calm and collected. No, I get it. I have anxiety just like anyone. I get nervous in certain situations. I think it's that I'm older than I look, and so I have had experiences that kind of mellow you out a little bit. Not that I'm like real world fucking bend to the shit or whatever, but I've been around a little bit and I read a lot. So, like this COVID-19 thing. Even when I was listening to the very worst case scenarios, I was like, all right, so it's like the Spanish flu. So it's like not as bad as half the epidemics that we had in the 19th century, where you'd have typhoid or cholera or whatever else just sweep through and kill. I remember reading. There's a great series of historical fiction novels called the Winning of America series by a guy named Alan Eckert, which covers a period of American history that a lot of people are not that well versed on, because it's not the Civil War and it's not the Revolutionary War, but the period in between, and about the settlement of the Ohio River Valley and the wars between Tecumseh and the Shawnee, and then people like Simon Kenton and Daniel Boone, and really good books. There's a lot of it is historical fiction, and looking back now, there's stuff that he said that is kind of bullshit, but um, there's one scene where he talks about Black Hawk's War, which is this war that happened in Illinois and Wisconsin, where these basically destitute refugees, the Fox Indians, kind of went on the war path. And uh, William, what the fuck? Who is General Scott? The famous, George C. Scott. No, that's the actor. God damn it. Who's he was, well, last name Scott. Um, Famous general from the War of 1812 all the way up to the Civil War, was sent by Washington to quell this rebellion. And so they took a steamboat from Lake Erie all the way to Chicago. And it was the first steamboat to make it to Lake Michigan and whatever. And they brought cholera with them. And there was a cholera epidemic, and 10% or something of the people died. And that was a normal, like, they were still terrified, but that was like a normal thing. And so when I hear about COVID-19 and I hear 3% death rate, well, I'm not happy about that. That sucks. But we have modern medicine in a way that makes that much easier. I can go and buy a cow and fill up my freezer, and I could literally have just stayed in my house for 6, 7, 8 months, a year, and been okay. So but the perspective of just knowing that, um, look, humans have been dealing with this forever. We're the survivors of all of that. Not to diminish it, but like it just gives you a perspective to be like, it's not the end of the world. We have seen so many plagues and pandemics, and I don't think there's any that are going to be able to destroy us, and certainly not this. In fact, at this point, it's pretty clear that the reaction has been worse than the actual plague. The problem with having militias today is that there is a lack of average citizens having training. Discipline is needed. Yeah, so I agree with that very much, Adirondack guy. And Boston Tea Party, I would recommend, if you're interested in this, read his book, Boston's Gun Bible, and then read his novel, Molon Labe. And I'm putting quotes here. I don't want to go into too much detail, but read Molon Labe and just realize that it's more of a handbook than a novel. It's a really good novel, though, which the Socialist Party of the United States should be burned. So secret communists, you probably wouldn't like it. I believe, I advocate that people practice a martial culture. Right? I don't want people to go to war. I don't want people to fight frivolously. I don't want people to be violent. But it's good to have a skill, and it's good to have something to work at. And it's also good to work with other people. And if you can do something that is also going to be useful, so much the better, right? So if you're learning a skill that you could also use, if you're learning how to hunt or to trap, awesome, because you could actually use that stuff. Well, if you're learning to have martial skill, if you're learning to be a good tactical marksman, right? You're good with a handgun, you're good with a rifle in an urban environment, rural environment. That's good. That's a cool skill to have. That's something for you to strive at and to gain perfection at. And you do an hour a week. If you do an hour a week, you're going to be more trained than the average soldier in a couple months. Okay, if you do more than that, even more so. And if you have buddies that you train with, we'll have a team, we'll do team sports, me and 3 buddies, we're going to practice and blow. And yeah, 4 guys, whatever, but 4 guys times 1,000. I mean, that's 4,000 guys who train together, spread out. They don't have an answer to that is forthcoming and obvious, and wouldn't cause a whole lot of problems. And that's 4,000 groups of 4 doing that, or 1,000 groups of 4 doing that, is well within the realm of plausibility. In fact, that has probably already happened. You got to be wise about it. If you advertise, you're going to get too much attention, but there's people doing that right now. I guarantee it. How many? No idea. Where? Could guess, don't know. But like having a martial culture means you're ready for the day when it's important, whether it's Uncle Sam or somebody else. But I agree. Yeah, you need to train. It's not enough to own a gun, and I mean that's a good start. That's step 1. But you want to be ready, and ready means you need to prepare. Just starting to watch. Have you read Kaplan's book on open borders? I have not. In fact, I don't even think I have it. I have a couple of his other books about education and selfish reasons to have more kids, and The Myth of the Rational Voter, which I have read, but I have not. I actually don't think I have his open borders book. Many frontier militia soldiers in the American Revolution were already trained and war veterans in the French and Indian War. Well, Androdic guy, one thing about the United States is we actually do have a very large cohort of former soldiers who are back in civilian life, like millions and millions and millions of them, and a lot of them hate the government. So, and when you see like these 3%ers or the Minutemen or whoever, sometimes they're the weekend warrior, beer belly, piece of shit, whatever, couch referee or whatever, and sometimes they're like legit, veterans with serious training. So, and I've heard that there are some people like in the Rand Corporation, they've done policy papers where they think this is a real problem because they have a lot of people who have military skills and knowledge of the military and connections in the military who nonetheless are not really loyal to the government, not really loyal to the military, and they're back in civilian life. And there's like tens of millions of those people. Mm. He was on the Bob Murphy podcast, and I found his position poorly made. ANCAP, I'll actually give that a listen to. I listen to Bob Murphy intermittently, and I will give that a listen to because I would actually like to hear those two talk. After the Civil War, our region was plagued with smallpox because of what the Union soldiers brought back. Yeah, and how many people got the cholera or got the, it was just crazy. It was and that was for the Anglos. For the Native Americans, it was 100 or 1,000 times worse. So yeah, this sucks, but like, can you imagine, where the common cold goes and kills half your village? It just ruins your entire culture. You're like wiped off of the historical. You don't even get to exist in history. You get wiped out before history begins. Um, have you ever had a relationship or known bisexuals? Is that more difficult than being with a gay person? I've definitely known bisexuals, and I've met bisexuals, but there's kind of a urban legend that they're a myth. There's a lot of guys who are gay but are uncomfortable admitting that they're gay, and so there's like a intermediate stage where they say that they're bi, and so they're completely gay. I mean, I've had guys who said they've never had a fantasy about a girl, or they haven't in like 10 years, and they only have sex with men, and they only want to have sex with men, and when they fantasize, it's only about men, but they identify as bisexual. And they will usually do that until they're 21 or 22, and then they become gay. Now, there are actual bisexuals, but it's just really rare. And I don't know that it would be any harder. Typically, bisexuals are either they don't want to put up with women or they just find men sexier. You definitely know if you had Kaplan's Open Border books. It's a graphic novel. Oh, yeah, I definitely don't have it then. Virtually every age group and friend group older than 20 has at least one member with weapons and combat training. It would be wise to network with your ex-military buddies. Yeah, I don't know if that's exactly true, but something that ratio is probably roughly correct. Now, there's a ton of potential there, and if the need ever arose, how much of that potential would be realized is a good question. It wouldn't be all of it, but it also wouldn't be none. And it wouldn't take a ton of it for some really crazy shit to happen. Um, if it was all developed beforehand, that's a no-brainer in that kitchen. If we had 10 million trained, organized people, decentralized, right? So you couldn't infiltrate, one group and be like, okay, the federal government sent their agents in and we took over the North American militia or whatever. If it's divided up among 100,000 different organizations, that's just not going to happen. Is that the book that has a ton of ads on YouTube? I don't know about you guys. All my ads are for Caleb Maddox. Where were you when 9/11 happened? I was a senior in high school in Michigan, and I was in school, and it was after first period, but before second period. While we were waiting for second period to start, people were talking about it, and we turned on the TV and started watching it. And I was 2001. I was 18. It's funny the stark contrast in military culture between the US and Canada. In Canada, the military is seen as a jobs program. Soldiers walking around never get thanked for their service. First of all, Stephen, I hate that term, thank for your service. As Brett Venot on School Sluts podcast pointed out, and this is of all the things that he said that I found the most useful. A service is when two people agree to something. Okay, so if I say, hey, will you shovel my driveway from snow and I'll pay you $20, and you say, sure, I will, then you provided me a service. If I'm asleep and I wake up and you have shoveled my driveway and I never asked you to, you didn't provide me a service, and you can't demand my money. That's just extortion on the pretext of exchange, which is the best, the closest that the pro-government people can come for an argument for a justification of taxation, that it's extortion on the pretext of exchange. So nobody is voluntarily paying taxes, and no one's voluntarily asking soldiers to do what they're doing. So it is not service. And actually, a lot of them don't like that. They don't like being treated that way. It's so perfunctory, and it's so insincere, and it's so, they're getting credit for stuff that they may or may not did. So many of them didn't really do anything. It is a jobs program to a large extent in the US as well. So not everybody who's in the army was a gung-ho warrior on the frontier of Afghanistan giving it to the Taliban, which, by the way, is kind of a questionable service to your fellow Americans. Most of them are just going to be clerks and bureaucrats and whatever, and then to pretend like they're Hogan's heroes doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense to them either. I feel like it's much better to be real with them, and I've got lots of friends in the military. And I have no problem saying what I think. And I'm sure there is some group that would not like that and expects you to do the flag and all that shit, but most of them are not that jingoistic in my experience. Right? If they believe in the rhetoric of the Constitution and all that shit, then they wouldn't be jingoistic. Yep, it's the crap pushed by the Cato Institute. I just looked up. Ask Mr. Kaplan about opening Israel's borders. That's a fair question, Greg, but I don't, as far as I know, Kaplan is not a Zionist, so I don't know if you're going to catch him in that. There's a lot of people that's a fair question to, right? But I don't know if Kaplan falls into that category. Not that you can't have an honest debate with him about open borders, but I don't think he's a Zionist. Bob Murphy, episode 91. All right, and Cap, thank you very much. I'll definitely check it out on my next walk. I agree that some bisexuals like myself don't like dealing with the modern female, but I do find men and women equally attractive. Just don't want to be committed. My personal problems. Well, if you don't want to be committed, being gay makes more sense. Have you seen the Curb Your Enthusiasm clip where he doesn't thank the soldier for his service and he has an emotional breakdown? No, I haven't. I've never watched Curb Your Enthusiasm. What do you think of the Mossad did 9/11 conspiracy theory? Sure, why not? I mean, I don't know. It wouldn't be the first time Israel attacked the United States. It was completely in their interest. So, and they wouldn't. Look, I'm pretty sure a large proportion of them, not all, a large proportion of them, large proportion of Zionists or Jews, either one, again, not all, see non-Jews as goy that can be killed, that have no rights, right? That we're not equals, and we can be used in any way that they see fit to. Now, again, they don't all think that, but many of them do, and it fits right in with their real politics. But that doesn't prove that they did it. So, would they? Sure. Could they? Sure. Did they? I don't think they could have done it without the United States knowing. There's also a lot of Saudi connections, but of course the Israelis and the Saudis get along just fine nowadays. How funny is that? Is he a Zionist? I don't know that Kaplan's a Zionist, so. The vast majority of the defense industry in the U.S., including the military, is a jobs program. It's one of the reasons why F-35 was so expensive. Every state builds a different part. Why? Jobs. Yeah, not only that, they build it in different countries, and so a lot of the foreign aid that we give to Israel, for instance, is allocated to build parts for an F-35. And Hackworth's books about face, I mean, this was bad even in the 60s and 70s. It's still true now. So the military-industrial complex is hugely wasteful, and if we have $1 trillion army, people shouldn't imagine that that's $1 trillion of Waffen-SS crack troops. It's a gigantic, wasteful bureaucracy that has some effective units, absolutely, and there's a lot of military personnel, military hardware, and you do not want to take that lightly, but it is not a lean, mean velociraptor of a nation-state military. It's hugely inefficient, hugely wasteful. And as people have pointed out, I remember, well, I think it was the guy he worked at Skunk Works at Lockheed Martin, and I believe he I believe he was on the design team for the F-14 or the F-15. And he said that the F-35 is hugely expensive, hugely ineffective, uh, hugely dangerous, hugely inferior, but it's a very successful jet, right? It's done its job. Well, what do you mean? If it sucks, it's so bad and it's so expensive, and it's not a very good weapon, how has it done its job? Well, because its job is to give money to Lockheed Martin. That's its job. And so it's hugely expensive and takes a ton of money and a ton of time. The fact that it's a piece of junk doesn't matter. The point is for them to raise money. So I advise everyone who's interested in this topic to read the book Depression, War, and Cold War by Robert Higgs, which is one of the very best books I've ever read on the military-industrial complex. Well, it's definitely the best book I've ever read on that topic. And it covers the birth of the military-industrial complex, which really can date to the spring of 1940, so a full 16, 17 months before Pearl Harbor happened. And up to that point, the military had had a bidding contract. So they would say, we need a rifle. And the rifle needs to be within this weight parameter and this many rounds and this accurate and this durable. And it needs to be this cheap. And all the gun manufacturers would try, and they get all their geniuses together and they would all put it together. And sometimes it would be a big company and sometimes it would be a small company. And they'd say, here we go, this is what we did. And then the Army would do tests and they'd say which one was the best. And then that's the one that they would pick. And so they get a gun that would be high quality, low cost, because there'd be competition and there wouldn't be automatic. Military-industrial complex was born on the assumption of cost plus profit. We're just going to tell you, build this to us. Whatever your costs are to develop it, we'll pay. And then when you manufacture it, we'll pay whatever the costs are plus a certain percentage. I think it was 4 or 5%. But then, of course, they inflate how much it costs, so it's more like 15, 20% most of the time. Hugely more expensive, hugely less effective. Right? There's no competition, so it doesn't matter the F-35 is junk. Lockheed Martin is well connected. So they're going to get the contracts. They're not going to have a competition between McDonnell Douglas and Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin and Boeing and the 100 other plane companies that could exist but don't because we have regulatory capture. And so it's actually kind of scary. I mean, if you were actually thinking about the United States being involved in a war, it's actually kind of scary. It's a service in the sense that you become a servile slave to the state. Yeah, fair enough. Opinion on the Ahmed Arbery situation. So from what I know, and I'll be straight up, the only thing I know is listening to Ben Shapiro talk about it for 10 minutes, is that it sounds like, and this could change with details, it sounds to me like an off-duty cop, or sorry, retired cop who was a little trigger happy and a little too eager to get back in the game, basically tried to citizens arrest somebody who was likely not guilty of anything and killed them. That's what it looks like to me in the video. So it looks to me like it's murder 1 or murder 2 or manslaughter at best. But there are details that could change that, and we don't know. So, I can't really speak too much about it. There were Israeli intelligence operatives arrested on the day with explosives, and the dancing Israelis, and Otago, and yeah, I've heard all this, not denying it. I just haven't made heads or tails of everything. Known as the dancing. Yeah, I remember the dancing Israelis. I'm seeing more and more men don't consider themselves gay because they do not want to be associated with LGBTQ community and the gay stereotypes that deny promoting but yet do. I don't know people denying that they're gay, they're just not getting involved with that. Military equals socialized cost, privatized profits, same old recipe. Yep. Yeah, only it's a way bigger batch than normal. It used to be that males between the age of 16 and 60 were required to practice the right to join the local militias. With modern times, I can't see this happening. We have gone so far from the Constitution. Look, anything can happen. But I agree, it doesn't seem likely, and it doesn't seem like it would be easier to change. Kaplan's definitely not a Zionist. Yeah, I never got the Zionist vibe from Kaplan, to be honest. The open borders thing is great for you when you have people who are super open borders here, but then not for Israel. So it's hilarious, and the Nick Fuenteses of the world point that out, and the America Firsters point that out for the people who clearly are not America First. Like they have obvious divided loyalties, and yet are loath to admit that. Like people like, I mean, the Charlie Kirk stuff and Ben Shapiro. Fuck, dude, just come out and say you believe in Israel more. That's fine. I don't like. I'm not a nationalist, but don't just come up here and pretend that you're all America, 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 but you really got a hard on for Israel, and that's where you'd rather be. Then fucking move there. Someone like Alan Dershowitz, who I have mixed feelings of, he's apparently a pedophile with um, fucking Epstein, but when he talks about like gun rights and trial rights, he's very eloquent. And then when he talks about Israel and Palestine, just sounds like a complete cuck. But as Finkelstein points out, there's a lot of these guys. It's very strange. Jews have it very good in America, like everyone does. Blacks have it very good in America. White people have it very good in America. Jews have it really good in America. Jews have it better in America than they have it in Israel. You don't have to be in the IDF here. You don't have to pay high taxes. You don't have to. There's more here. There's better here, right? And yet many of them fetishize Israel. Not all. There's plenty of American Jews who are not Zionists. So remember that, zoggers out there. But um, it's really weird. Like they love Israel and they fetishize it and they praise it, and they could move there. They have the right of return, so called, and they've got the money. Dershowitz got the money. Shapiro's got the money. So why are they still here? So maybe that's where. So it's really strange. Like it's an interesting phenomenon. America is better than Israel. Yeah, I agree. Well, I like mountains, so like Israel would be kind of out. Speaking of military idolatry, remember how conservatives lionize Chris Kyle? I do. Look, I've got his book right there. I've not read it though. I don't know if I could. Um, yeah, and that's one thing about conservatives. Like I say, I generally agree with them more than the left, but they're how sycophantically worshipful they are of the military and the police is really revolting and disgusting. True, but Taiwan is number one, China is number four. Number one at what and number four at what? I was going to ask you in reference to American Indian anarchist tribes, which ones were they? Could Tainos and Choctaw tribes be possible? Yeah, so there's a spectrum there. Ones that I'm most familiar with in the upper Midwest where I'm from. So the Illinois were considered more statist, but most of the Algonquin tribes, so the Ojibwe, Ottawa, Potawatomi, um, some of the other Algonquin nations, the Huron, Wyandot, they were much more stateless. The Iroquois were more state-centered. Farther north you go, the more anarchist you're going to get. So the Cree, Creek, sorry, the Creek are south. Um, Southeastern United States seem to have more proto-state kind of things going on. At least when the Spanish arrived, it seems to be that the diseases that DeSoto and the other first explorers brought really heavily disrupted the southeastern United States, which seemed like it was more agricultural and more urban, and it just completely fell apart. So when the settlement started, it was more hunter-gatherer esque. People are going to dispute that, but it clearly had been heavily disrupted. Um, so if you look tribes in the Great Plains, those like the Comanche, the Apache, the Arapaho, even the Cheyenne, the Lakota, these are pretty anarchist, right? They don't have a lot in terms. There's really nothing you could call state in those situations. In Mesoamerica, obviously, though, I mean, the most statist would be Aztec, Inca, some of the Mayans, whereas the people, the less well known but more decentralized people of, say, Guatemala or Belize were much more anarchist, and they fared much better against the Spanish. The Taino, I don't know. I mean, the Taino went extinct by the 1520s, so I don't know how much we know about. Same with the Arawak and those first groups of the Antilles, and the Choctaw, I don't know. I mean, they ended up in Oklahoma, so who knows? What do you think in the human psyche craves the power of the state to exist over themselves? Well, I actually think it's more a question that people desire status and power, and to another degree, material wealth, and historically, access to females. And so people want to have status and they want to have power over each other. Um, and so they'll get as much as they can get away with. And given logistical constraints, how that manifests can kind of vary. With a certain technological network, you can have a state, and others you can't. So if you have an economy that makes taxation very difficult or prohibitively difficult, you don't really have a state. But if you have an economy where taxation is efficient because people are agricultural and the crops can easily be counted, or you have a money economy, then it's something you can have. But it's kind of like not necessarily going to be there. It's a type of criminal activity, like a type of parasitism, right? Certain parasites can only exist, like there's types of body lice that you have to have clothing to get. And if you don't have clothing, you won't have them. Well, if you have certain types of society, you can get states, not that you need them, not that you want them, but because there's an efficiency there. It becomes easier to pay the taxes than it comes to fight a revolution, which isn't necessarily the case if you're a pastoralist. If you're a pastoralist, it's easier to fight a revolution or flee than it is to submit to a state. And so pastoral societies didn't really establish states, and even more so with hunter-gatherers. So I don't think people have a desire to have states. I think people have a desire to have authority over others. Some people do, and I think that this actually varies a lot. And I also do think that there is, and I keep wanting to make videos about this, but I'm nervous about doing it. But there is a will to submit that's very widespread in our society. There's a will to dominate and a will to submit, and there's a lot of people who want to submit and who want to. I mean, some of them will even say explicitly they want to be slaves. So that's out there, and we see that with other social, like our closest relatives, like chimpanzees, where if you have a dominant alpha male, the subordinate males, they can either fight, and they do sometimes, but sometimes that can be really dangerous, and you can die from doing that. And sometimes it makes more sense evolutionarily speaking, to placate and please the alpha, to make him feel good, and groom his back and be submissive, and he won't kill you then. And then maybe when he dies of a disease or gets killed by a jaguar or whatever it is, well, okay, no jaguars in Africa, a lion or whatever, or a leopard, then you get your chance. Or if you have other beta chips that you can align with, and you can gang up on them and kill them. So there's this tension between wanting liberty, not wanting to be tyrannized, but also recognizing that, practically speaking, sometimes the best thing to do is to submit. And sometimes that is the best thing to do, if submission is better than death, and many people will agree that it is, not everyone obviously, then there's an adaptive advantage to that many people have, and so many people want to submit. I don't know how much this is in with straight people, but with the gay people, this is hugely common. Hugely common, the desire to both submit and to be dominated. And it seems impossible to me that those sexual proclivities are completely divorced from social reality. Jesus, goddamn. Holy cow. I have one little. Jesus. It would pawn if civilians could own tanks without main gun disabled. Yeah, that'd be awesome. And it wouldn't really be very good for crime either. Um, with the division in our nation, do you see liberal states being divided, upstate and New York City divided, California divided? You see, that would make a lot of sense. It's not going to happen because they don't want to diminish their own power. How do you feel as George Washington as president? I feel like he was a very corrupt man and a very ambitious man. He was capable in a lot of ways, and I think that he was very shrewd. He was shrewd in a meta sense. He was very, when he was younger, from before the French and Indian War up until the American Revolution and immediately thereafter, he was trying to enrich himself in a very, very corrupt way with land deals. He was very, very obviously corrupt and trying to become wealthy. And I think he realized very shrewdly that if he became the magnanimous politician and the Cincinnatus, the man who became president and could have been king, but then retired to his farm, that he would go down in history with a legacy that, well, would make him the most famous, one of the most famous people in history, that certainly one of the most famous in American history. And he was right about that. That's my take. As president, he did a lot of shit that I don't agree with, especially creating an army, the wars against the Native Americans. He was very diplomatic in that. He had a lot of virtues too. I don't want to take it all away from him. I'm also, I think about this a lot. Like, does he get credit? Was he really a good man, or did he do this because he knew that it would virtue signal? But he did really do it. Like, he did really not go for a third term. He really did go back to his farm. Now, I think he did that because he knew it would immortalize him to the ages. And I don't know if he then should or should not get credit for that. But his land deals in Kentucky were corrupt as sin. And creating the army, he did a lot of machinations to get that done. And it was a disaster then, and it's been a disaster ever since. If everyone in America had guns, do you think government would still exist to enforce its oppressive tyranny? It wouldn't be enough if they just had guns, but if they had guns and they trained with guns and they were willing to use them, yes, the government would be gone very quickly. Comment about Taiwan was a joke. Okay. What's Taiwan? It doesn't exist. I figured I'd ask you about the Choctaw Indians and the Tainos. You must be from Oklahoma. Taino DNA is still common, but it's in the minority, similar to the Aztecs. Gonna lurk while I walk dog. Have a good night, and if I don't get another chance to say bye. Okay, thanks for the Bob Murphy, episode 91. I'll check it out. Do you buy the argument by Graham Hancock that there was civilization on a massive scale in the Amazon? Seems unlikely to me. The Mississippi River system would have been a much better candidate. Well, was there some? There was more than there was. They've started to find the sites now. How massive? If he's saying that they had 20 million people and spaceships or whatever, no. If it's Atlantis, no. But there probably was something more. There's no way we know everything. And I agree. I don't know if I even agree, because the Amazon basin is pretty potentially very, very productive. We see what happened in the Yucatan and Mesoamerica. So I'm not going to preclude the possibility that couldn't have also happened in the Amazon basin, which at the end of the day is a vastly, vastly larger ecosystem for a human society to be based than the Yucatan or central Mexico. So, and we know this, something was in the Mississippi. We got Cahokia, we got the Hopewell, the mound builders. We have agricultural societies extending all the way up the Missouri, at least into South Dakota. So, and there's been a lot of books written on this, but see, it's in the prehistoric period, literally. There's no history here. All we have is the archaeology, and the archaeology is a little spotty. But what we do have is way more advanced than what we found, in the colonial period. So there was something and there was a massive collapse. It could have happened before contact, before Columbian times. Very likely, though, it happened because of disease after the age of exploration, but before the age of settlement. So I definitely think that there were, quote, civilization in the Amazon, and it was more than what we find there now. But Hancock has a way of like exaggerating stuff a lot. So, have you ever heard of the Olmec tribes in Mesoamerica? Well, sure, I've certainly heard of the Olmec. A lot of speculation that they were Africans or Phoenicians or Romans or Atlanteans. They're famous for their big stone heads that look African. Would you be okay with an LTR with someone who doesn't share 100% of your political views? Yeah, of course. Absolutely. My 8 days being 25 have been very surreal. My quarantine day was so boring, but I had a lot of good food though. Oh, that's good. Happy birthday. I don't know how analogous lewd and political submission is. I don't know how analogous it is either, but I don't think that they're completely separated. All right, you can't spend all day fantasizing about being a slave and not have that affect your politics. Could Nietzsche's genealogy of morals and the concept of slave versus master morality help and the question of the desire for the state? Not being familiar with Nietzsche and his genealogy of morals, I cannot answer that, so I'm sorry. Governments aren't natural anyway. That I'm not sure I agree with that. I never agreed wanting a government and what makes a small group of humans more special than my existence. That's stupid and insane. From psychological enslavement. Yeah. Yeah, it's common in heterosexual relationships, love of dominance, obedience. I don't mean sexually, I mean in how people treat each other. That's what I've heard. That's what I've heard. And I've had over the years, it's not real common, but a lot of subscribers message me and they'll say, I'm straight and I want you to dominate me. I want you to take control of me. I want you to tell me what to do. And gay guys do that all the time. And there's a great freedom, ironically enough. It can be very liberating to submit and to allow yourself to be controlled by somebody else. And a lot of people crave that all the time. I feel like secession is inevitable, though. In the long run, when it comes to our founding fathers, if you look for evil actions, you will find it. If you look for good, you will find it. Unless you are a nonpartisan, you will find what you desire to look for. Yeah, I mean, that's true. What I like about the left attacking Washington is that they are finally laying bare that they hate America right down to the foundation, which they always did but kept concealing. Greg Lee, well, I just criticized Washington pretty thoroughly, so happy VE Day. Oh my God, is that today? So that's the joke, Tortoise Dream. On May 7th, 1945, Chuck Norris was born, and on May 8th, Germany surrendered. This is not a coincidence. So Admiral Dönitz surrenders. Wow. What year is it? 1920. So what does that put us? 75 years? Wait, 50, yeah, 75 years ago. Damn. America would have been a better place if people weren't statists to believe in the founders. Yep, I agree. That's all true. Who was the most based founding father? Probably Jefferson or Thomas Paine or Patrick Henry. But I'll be honest, I'm not that familiar with all of them, so it'll be hard for me to answer that. Not Adams, though, and not Washington, and not Hamilton either, contrary to what Michael Malice might say. I did a calculation of how long the state has been around, and according to the Keynesian calculator, the state has existed over 5,518 years approximately. Correct me if I'm wrong. Well, what state? Okay, so the United States hasn't been around that long. The problem here is, like, let's say the first state starts, and let's say it starts in Mesopotamia. Historically, we kind of say Uruk. I guess the The tradition in Mesopotamia was that the first city was Kish. So we know about Kish, but we don't have evidence that it was that old. But at the time, they apparently thought it was, or maybe the kings of Lagash. But let's say that that first state, let's say it starts in 3500 BCE. Okay, that doesn't mean that everyone in the world had a state at that point, right? Everyone who lived in the rest of Eurasia, in Africa, in the Western Hemisphere, in Australasia, they didn't have states. And so when did we get to the point where even half the population lived in a state? And actually, that's probably much more recent. That could be 1000 AD, could be 1600 AD, depending on how you define a state. So, and there's people today who still don't really have states. I mean, cartography can really confuse us because we look at a map of the world and states cover the whole thing. But in many places, those are just imaginary lines. And really, there are people who have no idea that they're, like what are the North Sentinelese? Do they know they're part of the Indian state? Probably not. Interestingly, I don't know much about Thomas Jefferson aside from the contemporary demonization about his racism. Got a book recommendation. Yeah, History of the United States of America during the First Administration of Thomas Jefferson, Volume 1 by Henry Adams, who's the grandson of John Adams. I would recommend this and Volume 2. I read John Mickham's book on Jefferson, and he tried to paint the story that he was essentially a megalomaniac. He stretched quite a bit. I haven't read it, so I can't say. But he did become president, so it's not impossible. Dönitz should have led post-war Germany instead of crazies. Nuremberg tried to hang one of their most honest members of the German command. No one's starting the boogaloo. Not yet, not tonight. I find it embarrassing that when I argue with some college students about republics, they don't know Rome once was a republic, even though different from ours. Sad. Well, people just don't know their history at all. Everyone's heard of Rome, but people don't know that it had a kingdom at one point. It was a republic. Then it was an empire, and even the empire had stages. You had the Principate and the Dominate, and then you had Diocletian, and divided into two halves that were kind of separate states, but united in some sense. And the Western Empire ended in 471, and the Eastern Empire lasted until 1453. A lot of people don't realize. A lot of people have never even heard of the Byzantine state, and a lot of people who have heard of it don't realize that that's essentially the Eastern Roman Empire. But people don't know that. People went to public school, so they don't know all that much. I'm actually related to Jefferson, believe it or not. Are you a former slave? Isn't it interesting how liberals get really passionate about people not contacting the Sentinel Islanders even to establish modern medicine and human rights? Liberals treat them like wildlife. Do you think World War III is coming? I mean, there'll definitely be other wars. Will we call them World War III or not? I don't know. But there's definitely more wars coming. There's no evidence that's going to be over, sadly. All right, guys, it's been over 2 hours. So this is going to be the last call, final questions. I'm related to Taft. I'm related to Carter Glass, who started the Federal Reserve. I mentioned that once or twice before. My late maternal grandfather had an ancestor that was first cousins with Jefferson. Oh, interesting. famously, John Tyler has two grandsons who are still alive, so they're in their 90s, and they'll say stuff like, "When my grandfather talked to Thomas Jefferson, how old are you? I am 37." Mm. Oh my goodness. Mm. Favorite pizza, pepperoni. White Cat pepperoni from Alley Cat Pizza on Elm Street in Manchester. Tell us who has accounts with the Fed. One of my one of my one of my longtime friends handled the retirement accounts for the Federal Reserve. That was his job, and he told me lots of fun things about it that I don't think I should talk about. The Sentinel Islanders could be engaged in slavery, opposing women, abusing children, generally mutilating children, and liberals don't even really care. Please don't feed the wildlife. Yeah, but we're also worried that if they contact, they'll all die of disease. Right? I don't. The fact that I don't think the Indian state has any ownership of them, so I'm not praising their culture, but I don't care. I mean, they should just be free or whatever. What type of libertarian studies would you prefer to the average person that wants to understand it better? Well, there's a ton of podcasts and things like that, but I really do think that the best way to learn is to read books because they really can flesh out ideas in more detail. So that's what I recommend. And I've got two, I mean, I did my whole library, so you can look at every book that I have here. But I also have two videos, Best Libertarian Books and then Best Libertarian Books 2, where I go into that quite a bit and kind of talk about the books that I think are the most useful for people. So that's my number one recommendation. Obviously, most of that information can be obtained outside of books, but it's going to be spread out and not in a coherent narrative way. So that's what I recommend people do. Late saying hello and good night. Well, thank you, Ron. Nice to see you. Have a good night as well. Who is the Icelandic guy you got your username from? Well, it wasn't one guy. It was a group of guys. There were a group of Icelandic guys who had a YouTube channel. I think they still do. They don't make videos though, and they haven't for over a decade. Um, and when I was looking for videos of native Icelandic speakers, it was very hard to find any. There were like news broadcasts, and then there were like these very basic instruction videos that would maybe count to 10 or something like that. And then I found this channel, and it was a group of guys, um, and from a little town called Sticky Silmer on the Snæfellsnes Peninsula, and they just would do like goofy skits. They would just do stupid videos playing with each other, goofing around, doing a bunch of stupid teenage shit. But it was the only, they had lots of videos. I think they had, close to 100 videos that were often 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes long. And, I think they just really enjoyed making videos essentially for themselves. They weren't getting lots of views. And I started watching them because it was the only place where I could see Icelandic being spoken regularly. So I watched their videos all the time, and I kind of felt like I got to know them. I actually did get to know them. Like I found them on Facebook and became friends with them, and I've talked to a couple of them over the years. I still haven't met any of them, although one of the guys I hooked up with in Reykjavik ended up being a cousin of one of these guys. Um, but they they had one of their videos. They were it was it was a quiz show where one of them was interviewing the other ones and asking them questions. Do you like school? What are you studying? Do you play basketball? Stuff like that. And in the course of that dialogue, I understood what they were saying in a couple points, And at one point, I understood what they were asking, and I thought, "Oh my God, I know what he's saying." And I was really taken aback by I was really impressed by myself. And I'd actually had I had a previous account. I never had videos or a channel, but I had a previous YouTube account, and I never posted on it, and I don't even know if I commented with it, but I'd forgotten it. I didn't remember what it was. And so I was trying to comment on other people's videos, and you had to be a member to do that. And so I was like, well, I need to start a new account. So what am I going to do? And because I was just had this in my head because I just learned it, Lengthyounarther became the account name. So I wasn't thinking I'm going to make videos or this has any kind of special meaning. It was just, wow, this is in my head because I just learned this from these guys. And so that became the channel. And then that was probably 3 or 4 years before I even uploaded videos. Emma Goldman was pro-guns, left-winger. Yeah, there's lots of left-wingers who are pro-gun. Where do you view on incels? I think that it's very sad. Um, what would you do if you woke up tomorrow with Ancapistan? I would sleep in. You like Bjork? No. I haven't listened to her, so can't really, I'm not saying that like I'm critiquing, I've just never listened. I'm related to Kaplan, fourth to eighth cousins, according to 23andMe. All right, invite yourself over to his place. Are you going to do any more debates in the future? I haven't debated anybody. I haven't had any episodes that are debates. No one's ever asked me to debate. I've never been in a debate show. I've never been. The only other times I've done videos with other YouTubers, it's been conversational interviews and not debates at all. So I've never done a debate. I've never been asked to do a debate. I'm related to Prince the Singer. Length, have you ever really looked deeply into the far-right reactionary literature, Evola, Catholic, integratist, fascist, molebug, etc.? I've gone towards those views, but I still value your videos. No, I can't say that I have. I've only heard of a couple of those, and I'm certainly not familiar with their work. She's got some songs that she sings in Icelandic. Well, she is Icelandic, so that would make sense. Mm-hmm. All right, guys. Well, I want to thank everybody for listening. It's been a great time. And, if you can do it, get a gun, do concealed carry, do open carry. And, your rights aren't going to defend themselves. So be prepared.